Flames danced in the dark Lagos night as Mrs. Chinyere screamed in pain. In a small, cramped room, her burning cries shattered the silence, a sound that would haunt those who heard it for days to come. Welcome to my channel. Every story has a beginning, a twist, and an ending you'll never see coming. Stick around and let's explore the unexpected together. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss a moment. Now, let's get into it. Adanna was a bright student at Echo Scholars Academy, one of Lagos's finest schools. As the only child of Mrs. Chinyere, a successful cloth merchant at Balogan Market, Adanna had grown up surrounded by colourful fabrics, busy streets, and the hustle of modern Lagos life. Her mother, known for her generosity, always bought the best clothes, shoes, and even special gifts for the teachers. Everyone admired Mrs. Chinyere for how well she raised Adanna. But behind her warm smile, Mrs. Chinyere hid a dangerous secret. For over 10 years, she had longed for a child to be her pride and joy. When Adanna was finally born, it felt like a miracle. Yet her love soon turned into an obsession to keep Adanna as the star pupil, no matter what. Mrs. Chinyere had discovered a strange art, an old and secret way of using special gifts to steal away the talents of others. In her eyes, a few stolen gifts would make Adanna shine brighter than anyone. Life at Echo Scholars Academy was smooth until one day when a new girl arrived. Her name was Chimaka. Chimaka was smart, kind, and had a quiet strength that drew people to her. On her first day, she solved math problems with ease and smiled warmly at everyone. Students whispered, "Could Chimaka be better than Adanna?" Soon, admiration for Chimaka began to spread. Adanna, who had always been at the top of the class, felt a prick of envy. She remembered how every year she collected awards and praise, and now it seemed that Chimaka was stealing the light. Determined not to lose her title, Adanna did what she always did when someone new tried to outshine her. She offered Chimaka a gift. One afternoon, during break, Adanna approached Chimaka with a small, neatly wrapped box. "Welcome to our school," she said softly. But Chimaka, looking uncertain, shook her head. "My mama told me not to take gifts from people I do not know well," she replied. The simple words stung Adanna deeply. She forced a smile, but inside, bitterness grew. That evening, as Adanna recounted the day to her mother, Mrs. Chinyere's eyes glittered with a secret purpose. "So your gift was refused?" she asked quietly. Adanna nodded, fighting tears. "Mama, I feel like she's taking my place. What if she becomes the star of the class?" Mrs. Chinyere's face hardened as she listened. "Don't worry, my dear. Keep your smile and be friendly," she said. "I have a way to ensure our daughter remains the best." Late that night, when Lagos lay quiet under a starless sky, Mrs. Chinyere slipped out of her modest apartment. In a narrow corridor, lit only by a flickering street lamp, she murmured strange words in a low voice. Carrying a small, wrapped parcel, the same kind she often used, she made her way to the modest apartment of Chimaka. There, through a slightly open window, she watched the sleeping girl, then chanted softly and pressed the parcel against the glass. In that moment, a dark mist slipped into Chimaka's room as if drawn by an unseen force. The next day at school, everything seemed normal at first. Chimaka attended class with her usual smile, and Adanna performed well. But slowly, small changes began. During a math lesson, As Chimaka went to the board, her hand suddenly trembled. The marker slipped from her grip, and she returned to her seat with a pained look. Later, during a test, her hand felt numb and she could barely write. Whispers spread among the students. Chimaka isn't herself, they said. Even her teachers grew concerned. At home, Chimaka struggled too. Her mother, Mrs. Ucheki, a busy executive in downtown Lagos, barely noticed at first. When Chimaka tried to tell her about the strange tingling in her hands and the dreams that left her cold and scared, her words were brushed off. "It's just stress, my dear," Mrs. Ucheki would say hurriedly before returning to her work calls. Night after night, Chimaka suffered. In her dreams, she found herself in a dim, empty room. Around her, other children sat silently while a hooded figure passed out bowls of strange, lumpy food. No matter how hard she tried, she could not resist taking a bite. The taste was bitter, and soon her mind felt heavy, as if the world was slowly being drained from her. When she awoke, her body ached, and her thoughts were cloudy. She no longer looked forward to school or playing with friends. At Echo Scholars Academy, Mr. Olumide, a kind teacher who had taught both Adanna and Chimaka, noticed the change. "Chimaka, are you feeling all right?" he asked one morning, his voice full of concern. Chimaka forced a small smile and nodded, but Mr. Olumide's eyes told him there was more. By the end of the week, Chimaka's condition worsened. During a class quiz, her answers were slow and full of mistakes. Some students snickered quietly, while others exchanged worried glances. Adanna, who had once been so proud of her consistent top marks, felt a confusing mix of relief and guilt. That night, while lying awake in her bed, she thought about how Chimaka had once been a bright light in the class. Now that light was dimming, and Adanna's heart began to feel heavy. One evening, after a particularly rough day, Chimaka's mother arrived at the school after receiving a worried call from Mr. Olumide. In the quiet of the school office, Mr. Olumide explained, "I have never seen a student decline like this. Chimaka is not her usual self. There is something troubling her." Mrs. Ucheki's eyes widened. "I have been so busy, I did not notice. I must take her home and help her." But even as she left, a seed of doubt had been planted in her mind. What could be causing these strange troubles? A few nights later, a kind and gentle neighbor, Mrs. Ebel, came to visit Chimaka. Known in the community for her deep faith and wisdom, she had heard the murmurs and decided to check on the girl. Sitting beside Chimaka's bed, Mrs. Ebel softly prayed, "Lord, protect this child from all harm. Bring back the light in her heart." In that moment, a warm feeling spread through the room. Though the darkness was still there, it began to recede ever so slightly. Word of the mysterious events spread through the school and the community. Some whispered about a strange curse, while others recalled old stories of secret magic from distant lands. Adanna, tormented by her own envy and guilt, found it harder to face her classmates. The bright light she once carried seemed dim in comparison to the growing shadow over Chimaka. Days turned into a tense standoff at school. Chimaka's performance slowly improved as Mrs. Ebel continued to visit and pray with her. Yet the mystery of her sudden illness remained. Mr. Olumide, now deeply troubled, decided to speak with Mrs. Ucheki. "There is more at work here than simple fatigue. I have seen strange signs," he confided in a low tone. Mrs. Ucheki listened, her heart heavy with worry, and promised to watch over her daughter more closely. In the midst of all this, Adanna's inner turmoil reached a peak. One rainy afternoon, As she sat alone in the school courtyard, she remembered the gift she had once given Chimaka, the gift that had been refused. That small act, combined with her mother's secret whispers, now seemed to echo with a dark meaning. Tears welled in her eyes. "What have I done?" she whispered to herself. The envy that had once burned inside her was now replaced with a deep regret. Adanna realized that she had been a willing pawn in her mother's dangerous game. That same night, as thunder rumbled over Lagos, Adanna's thoughts were interrupted by a loud crash. She rushed to the window and saw a strange glow coming from the direction of her home. With a racing heart, she dashed back, fearing something terrible was happening. In her room, she found Mrs. Chinyere on the floor, clutching her hand, which burned with an eerie flame. The room was filled with a mix of smoke and the bitter smell of burning fabric. Mrs. Chinyere's eyes were wide with shock and pain. As she cried, "The curse! It is backfiring!" At that moment, a powerful force seemed to ripple through the air. In a surge of light that broke through the darkness, Adanna's long-hidden guilt and fear merged with a sudden resolve. She knew that her mother's dangerous magic must be stopped before it destroyed more lives. Trembling, Adanna approached her ailing mother. "Mama, please, tell me what you did. I want to make things right," she pleaded, her voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Chinyere, still gasping and in pain, managed to explain in broken words. I used an old gift, a secret power. I took the light from others, so you would always be the best. I never meant for it to hurt anyone." Her eyes filled with regret as she added, "It seems the power I stole was not meant to be controlled. It is now hurting not only Chimaka, but me as well." Hearing her mother's confession, Adanna felt a surge of determination. With trembling hands, she promised, "I will fix this, Mama. I'm so sorry. I never wanted any of this to happen." Even as the pain from the burning curse overwhelmed her mother, Adanna knew she had to seek help. The very next day, Adanna went to Mr. Olumide after class. In a quiet voice, she told him everything. The gift she had offered Chimaka, the secret the mother had shared, and the dark magic that had been unleashed. Mr. Olumide listened carefully, his face grave. "This is more serious than we thought," he said. "We must bring everyone together, the teachers, the parents, and our community leaders, to help break this curse once and for all." That evening, under a cloudy Lagos sky, a small gathering met in the school's prayer hall. Mrs. Ucheki, filled with worry for her daughter, joined the meeting alongside Mrs. Ebeli, Mr. Olumide, and several other respected members of the community. Adanna, with tears streaming down her face, admitted her part in what had happened. "I was jealous, and I gave a gift that was meant to be a token of welcome. I did not know that it would open the door to such a curse," she confessed. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the weight of her words. Mrs. Ebel rose and spoke in a calm, firm voice. "We must now call on the power of truth and prayer. The dark magic that was cast on Chimaka cannot stand against the united light of our faith and community." With that, the group joined in prayer, voices blending in simple, heartfelt words. "Lord, let your light shine through this darkness. Break every chain that binds our children. In the name of Jesus, we command this curse to be lifted." As they prayed, a warm breeze filled the hall, and a gentle light seemed to emanate from the very walls. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the first hints of dawn began to break over the city. In that sacred moment, a powerful surge of energy rippled through Echo Scholars Academy. It was as if every heart had united to call for healing. The following morning, Chimaka arrived at school with a new strength in her step. Her hand no longer trembled, and the dark dreams that had haunted her nights had faded. Her teachers noted that she was back to her old self, smiling, confident, and quick with her answers. Mr. Olumde praised her improvement, and even the students who had whispered now cheered her on. News of the miracle spread quickly. In Balogan Market and throughout Lagos, people marveled at how the curse had been broken by the united prayers of a small community. For Mrs. Chinyere, the price of her dark magic was steep. The burning that had marked her hand was a constant reminder of her misdeeds. With a heavy heart, she sought forgiveness from those she had wronged, starting with Chimaka's family. Mrs. Uchechi, though hurt and confused by what had happened to her daughter, listened as Mrs. Chinyere tearfully apologized. "I thought I was protecting my daughter, but I ended up hurting an innocent child," she said. Mrs. Uchechi's eyes softened with compassion. "We all make mistakes. What matters is that we learn and change." In time, the two mothers began to mend their ways. Mrs. Chinyere closed her shop for a while and sought help from wise elders in the community, determined to rid herself of the dangerous magic that had clouded her heart. Adanna, filled with remorse, went to Chimaka one afternoon as they sat under a large mango tree near the school. "Chimaka, I am truly sorry," she said, her voice shaking. "I let envy take over, and I helped my mother cause you pain. Can you ever forgive me?" Chimaka looked at her for a long moment. The hurt in her eyes slowly melted into understanding. "I forgive you, Adanna," she replied softly. "We all make mistakes. I just want us to move forward and learn from this." The two girls embraced, their friendship beginning to heal the wounds of the past. Over the next few months, Echo Scholars Academy saw a change that reached far beyond test scores and awards. The students learned that true success did not come from jealousy or stolen light, but from hard work, honesty, and compassion for one another. Teachers spoke of the events as a lesson in humility and the dangers of tampering with forces beyond our control. Mrs. Chinyere too changed. She worked hard to rebuild the trust she had lost. Though her hands still bore the marks of that fateful night, she used them to sew new fabrics for the community, clothes that celebrated the beauty and resilience of modern Lagos. Slowly, the dark magic that had once filled her heart was replaced with a gentle hope. In time, the memory of the curse became a whispered story among the people of Balogan Market, a cautionary tale passed from one generation to the next. They remembered the night when a mother's ambition nearly stole the light from an innocent child, and how the power of prayer and unity brought healing to all. And every time someone recounted the tale, they ended with a simple truth: no stolen light can hide the truth for long. As the sun rose over Lagos one bright morning, Adanna and Chimaka walked together to school side by side. Their smiles were real and full of promise. The dark chapter of envy and forbidden magic had closed, replaced by a future where every child's light could shine brightly on its own. In that promise lay the true spirit of their city, a spirit that, despite its many struggles, always found a way to rise above the darkness. And so, in the heart of modern Lagos, a lesson was learned and a curse was finally broken. The stolen light was returned, and with it, a brighter future for everyone. If you enjoyed the story, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember, every light has its own story, and sometimes it takes a community to restore what was lost. Thank you for watching.